This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Now, there are definitely some universal truths in this world. Death, taxes, and the inevitable that when AEW runs a pay-per-view, it's going to go 14 frickin' hours from start to finish. My God. I'm just convinced that Tony Khan doesn't sleep at this point. Because I just, for the life of me, can't explain how in the world you could run a pay-per-view for that length of time and still do a media press scrum afterwards. I knew the guy was crazy, but I don't know, man. He might be the craziest of all. And as you can tell by today's title, we are going to be talking about that pay-per-view. It was a pay-per-view. That you cannot deny. I have quite a bit to say about it, as I normally do when it comes to AEW's product. Lot of mixture of good and bad. Still trying to collect my thoughts, mostly because I'm still trying to catch up on sleep. But, you know, it's the usual when it comes to watching modern wrestling pay-per-views. And I'm not just throwing AEW into that equation because WWE is at fault for the same thing. You're ever lucky to get to bed before 1 o'clock in the morning when you're watching a wrestling show these days. So, well, we'll definitely get to the Revolution part of the show. Normally, I would probably do that at the top of the program just to kind of get it out of the way and not run off people from the podcast immediately. But, I mean, if you're here for just the Revolution review, you can skip ahead to later in the podcast when we talk about it. But we do have a couple other things at hand to discuss, including SmackDown from this past Friday night, as well as the continuation of our Retro Raw reviews. We will get to all of it. But first, in case I have any new stragglers that happen to be watching for the first time, we are on YouTube and Rumble with the FSWR podcast, Mondays and Fridays. We're on both platforms, so make sure you subscribe, comment, like the show, do all that fun stuff. And we will try to be as consistent as we can with this show. It's not easy to put these podcasts together, especially when I'm doing the job by myself. But as I've talked about before, if you've been following the channel for a while now, this is one of my few passions or hobbies that I really like doing. And regardless of what I may think about modern professional wrestling, like I said, as long as I still have the goal or the drive to come on here and talk about it, we're going to keep doing so. Some of you will like my opinion, some of you won't. It is what it is. But especially when it comes from me, you know you're going to get a very bold truth, no matter what we're talking about. So there is a lot to get to today, so I'm not going to overstay my welcome with the intros here. Let's get things rolling and on with the show. Raw rolls on. Speaking of the devil, we'll begin our program with that. So we're going to play a little game here with the opening VTR for Raw. I've got a riddle to work out with you.
Bro.
No, not that riddle. A puzzle, if you will. Okay, so last week on Raw, there was a WWF Championship match between Yokozuna and the Macho Man Randy Savage In that finish, Crush interfered and cost Savage the belt. So naturally, as you might expect, that led to this week's follow-up Raw, where we were told that Crush would be in tag action. And here's the question. Who was Crush's partner for this tag match? And who would they be facing? Keep in mind the names I just rattled off. A WWF title match with Yokozuna and Savage that ended in disqualification because of Crush's blatant interference. All right, you think you have the idea? Well, if your answer was, logically speaking, it would probably be Crush and Yokozuna teaming up to face Savage and perhaps another top babyface, say a Lex Luger or a Bret Hart. Well, you'd be incorrect. No, instead, the match was Crush teaming with Owen Hart to take on the Smoking Guns. I got nothing. Based on everything they replayed in that opening package, if you would have given me 150 guesses, I never would have guessed that after Crush cost Savage the WWF Championship on Monday Night Raw 7 days ago, they would follow up the next week by booking a tag match where Crush is teaming with another heel that is part of an entirely different feud and had nothing to do with that segment to wrestle an underneath tag team that also had literally nothing to do with anything involving that title match the previous week. I said it was a riddle. Didn't say it was going to make any sense. Kind of like AEW's booking from week to week. Honestly, I shouldn't even kid about that. As bad as the WWF was around this point, it still blows Tony Khan's booking out of the water. So they open with that tag match, and after having run down the remainder of the card before they rang the opening bell here, I determined that the show was more than likely going to peak with this match. I was not wrong in that assumption. And when you also consider that the match involved Billy and Bart Gunn and Crush, probably not a good sign. Owen was the best worker in this thing by a country mile, not even close. The back and forth between Crush and Bart Gunn in the early stages looked like I was watching two guys wrestling at half speed. Generally, I would say it was boring, inoffensive. Honestly, looking back, not a whole lot of note happened. Vince brought up the fact that this was the first time Crush and Owen ever teamed together. Ironically enough, they were also facing a pretty well-established tag team by this point in the Smoking Guns. I mean, they weren't necessarily new to the scene. They had been around for a little bit. And of course, Owen and Crush are just beating their asses like it's nothing. They did a spot toward the end where things kind of broke down with all four guys. Crush dumped Bart Gunn out to the floor so Owen could lock in the sharpshooter on Billy for the verbal submission. And then Owen mocked Bret on camera and said that he taught Bret how to do that move, which is just awesome. I also loved in the follow-up interview with both guys, of course, Vince immediately delivering one of his patented lines right out of the gate. Well, gentlemen, it appears that you both may be in cahoots, seeing as how Crush had a match lined up with Bret Hart in the coming weekend at the March to WrestleMania event. Oh yes, the legendary cahoots line that became synonymous with Vince McMahon's on-screen character during the Attitude Era. Get ready to hear that word dropped about 47,000 times between now and the late 90s. Anyway, yeah, Owen just asked Crush to take it easy on Bret, because Owen didn't want any excuses when they face off at WrestleMania. And then Crush promised that he was going to beat Brett into powder next week, but he wanted to save a little bit for his good buddy Owen. So yes, Crush versus Brett on the March to WrestleMania Sunday special. Get it? March to WrestleMania. Because it's the month of March. And they're marching down the road to WrestleMania. Forget it. WrestleMania Report with Todd Pettingill. Cringe TV. Already gone over the card in previous Pettingill segments, so really no sense in doing it again. Then we cut back to the ring for a JEFF JARRETT squash. He wrestled Virgil, which was the perfect opportunity for Ted DiBiase to spend the entire time burying him on commentary. Obviously, if you know the history between DiBiase and Virgil, you'll recall that they introduced Virgil in the WWF as DiBiase's bodyguard for a period of time. That was before he turned babyface. So DiBiase's sitting there talking about how Virgil's been a complete afterthought since he betrayed him and tried to venture out on his own, which, he wasn't entirely wrong. And while Vince is there talking about Virgil having great athletic ability and all this great fighting skill, DiBiase just goes, "You know what he doesn't have now? Money." And he lets out the signature $1 Million Man laugh. Ha 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 ha. I love Ted. I also enjoyed the moment in this match where Vince was trying to take Jarrett to task for doing too much complaining about hair pulling and tight grabbing, trying to compare him as doing more complaining than the White House communications director, who at the time was George Stephanopoulos. And of course, the comedy in the joke was that neither Vince nor Ted could properly pronounce his name. And even better, Vince then tried to be serious and actually get the pronunciation correct by saying, "I believe the correct pronunciation is George Stephanopoulos. And I still don't think that's right, pal." The announcers were also mentioning something about Rhonda Shear being another one of their 759 guest hosts for WrestleMania 10. And the only thing I picked up from that commentary was something about her being one of Shawn Michaels' sister wives. Truth be told, I don't think any further elaboration needs to be had. That joke pretty much writes itself. Beyond those details I jotted down, Virgil worked over Jarrett's arm for a few minutes, and then they did some do-si-do spots off the ropes until Double J caught Virgil with a DDT out of nowhere for the 3. At which point they did a quick promotional package for the Yokozuna Tatanka match that will also be taking place on the March to WrestleMania event. And while Vince was trying to rally up DiBiase's excitement level for Tatanka, it was perfect product placement for DiBiase to then talk about him being more excited that Double J was the feature cover on the Country Beat magazine, which probably seemed a little too good to be true at the time, seeing as how Country Beat was a pretty renowned magazine company. Naturally, we come to find out that Double J and DiBiase may have also been in cahoots with drumming up this cover page, because Vince proceeds to grab the magazine out of Ted's hand, and he begins peeling the corner of the page to reveal that they did in fact slap an artificial cover page on there. Because they're heels. And he would have gotten away with it too. Guess the joke was on Jarrett and DiBiase there. Speaking of jokes, Doink wrestled a horrible comedy match with Iron Mike Sharp, wherein before the opening bell, Doink sprayed Sharp in the face with what I originally wrote down here as a white substance. Vince claimed that this was WWF's version of white water. I mean, I know Vince was an advocate of the poop and puke jokes, but This one might have been a bit of a stretch. The match went 2 minutes. Mike Sharp took a bunch of wacky comedy bumps, including one at the end where he ran sternum first into the turnbuckle and then took a flat back bump where he looked like he'd been shot in the head with a gun. Dink stood on the floor and was completely useless the entire time, and Doink won with the seated splash. Hideous. Then we had a segment, a coronation of sorts. We come back from commercial, and in the ring are Vince McMahon, Chief Jay Strongbow, Wahoo McDaniels, still plural, and Chief Ray Little Turtle of a tribe that went completely over my head, and I forgot to rewind it to write down on a second listening. Looking back, it really wasn't that important. And this was done to set up Tatanka coming out so that they could present him with the native headdress that Tatanka's tribesmen voted to pass down to him, or something. I believe I got that story right. And while this all came off very random and out of the blue, I have to give credit where it's earned. Tatanka deserved an Emmy for his performance here. I have no idea if those were fake tears he managed to muster up or if he was just sweating profusely. But when he was doing the promo, talking about how much of an honor this is, how much he admired Strongbow and McDaniel for their dedication to the business, you're talking about how he used to pass through the lodge and see this headdress in the display area and how this was a sign of familial tradition passed down through multiple generations. Albeit I had no idea what the fuck he was talking about for half the promo, but damn it all if it wasn't convincing. Then they do the thing at the end where Strongbow and McDaniel present Tatanka with the feathers. Tatanka did his wacky little native dance around the ring. And my final note for the segment reads, so how long do you give it before a heel jumps Tatanka and steals the headpiece? I give it 2 weeks. And again, it's kind of depressing watching a segment like this take place when you realize that as random as all this came off on television, you look back, by this period in early 94, it kind of seemed like Vince McMahon was still on the Tatanka bandwagon. They were still featuring him. They were still trying to spotlight him as a big deal. Based on what they did here, you might have thought they were grooming him for a big run later down the road. Maybe even having him win King of the Ring or something. And it never happened. It's unfortunate too because, and I think I've talked about this before on the channel. While I was never the biggest Tatanka fan growing up, the guy was obviously a hard worker. Getting saddled with the Native American Indian gimmick was kind of an anchor for his career, but the guy could go in the ring. And right before they jobbed him out to Ludwig Borga late last year, it really seemed like Vince was going to do something with the guy. And it was just another tragic case of Vince getting bored with the talent and moving on to his next new toy. I mean, that's kind of the reality of what happened. And for the remainder of Tatanka's run in the company, he just kind of floundered in mid-card purgatory. It really sucks. But it wouldn't be the first or last time we'd see it throughout the course of this company's history. Speaking of guys that really suck, I once read a sign from the WWF crowd that read, "Irwin really sucks." Get it? Irwin really sucks. Acronyms for IRS. PE. So that was our TV main event for the week. IRS wrestled Mark Thomas. Not before trying to downplay Tatanka's ceremony deal and poking fun at the idea that Tatanka's going to have to pay taxes on the headpiece. So I think our mystery's been solved. There's your next big program. And for our sidetrack conversation in this match, While Vince and DiBiase spent the majority of the program talking about celebrities and politics and pretty much any other topic except for actually calling the ring action, this match featured our sports section commentary for the program, where Vince made a Darryl Strawberry reference, and then he brought out something about how another baseball player returned from a suspension not too long ago. I guess it was just universally accepted back in the day that if you were a professional wrestling fan, that also meant that you were actively paying attention to sports. Maybe I was the only one that wasn't. To be fair, I at least knew the name Darryl Strawberry. Couldn't tell you a damn thing about what team he played for, or what position he played, or the years he was active in the sport. But the name was somewhat familiar. In any case, IRS won, literally dripping with sweat by the time this was over. And the match itself only went like 3 minutes. But holy cow, Irwin looked like he'd been hanging out in the sauna for an hour by the time this match finished. And then following that was a quick package to promote Lex Luger and Jimmy Del Rey, also for the upcoming March to WrestleMania show. Conveniently done to bring out Jim Cornette and the Heavenly Bodies before the show ended, so Corny could share his thoughts on that upcoming bout, wherein he began his promo by poking fun at shitty American-made cars and talking about how much better the Toyota models are. And then he guaranteed that the Gigolo was going to rough Luger up and make sure that he barely makes it to WrestleMania for his title match with Yokozuna. Also guaranteeing that WrestleMania will be Luger's last match in the World Wrestling Federation. To which I snidely wrote down, may as well have been, considering where his booking direction went afterwards. It was a roller coaster ride all the way downhill from there. And, yeah, that was kind of how they wrapped up the show. It was also very apparent just how round Jim Cornette was during this stage of his life. Not that I'm trying to sit here and openly fat shame people, because I know Corny was about to enter a pretty rough stage dealing with his health in the next few years. I can imagine sitting in a booking meeting with Vince Russo for a couple years did a number on him physically and mentally. But, yeah, you know, we're watching those Crockett promotion shows, and there's a very young 20-something-year-old Jim Cornette cutting promos for the Midnight Express. He's in moderately decent shape for his time. Boy, howdy. Fast forward several years later, here he is in World Wrestling Federation programming, looking plump, to put it kindly. Definitely packing on some extra weight in the belly region. It was very noticeable. Still a great promo, though. Can never take that away from Corny. He's one of the wittiest, fastest-thinking promos I've ever heard in my entire life. Always knows how to get something over and make it seem impactful. Even a simple throwaway match on a live event special the week before WrestleMania, where everybody knows the outcome of the match. In any case, before we go to SmackDown, let me cover what's going to be happening with the Retro Raw content in the next couple weeks. There is no Retro Raw episode for next week to cover, since they're going to be running the March to WrestleMania show. And since the next episode of Retro Raw will not be happening until the night after WrestleMania 10, next week's Retro Series portion of the Monday show will basically take another back seat, temporarily. That'll just be another SmackDown-only podcast, which may not be beneficial to my overall health and well-being considering the last time we tried to do just a SmackDown report. But it's got to be done. Is what it is. And then, of course, we'll resume the following week where we'll talk about WrestleMania 10, and then we'll also cover the following night's Retro Raw and the SmackDown report. A lot of stuff we're going to be packing in within the next 2 weeks. But, you know, since I have a little bit of downtime next weekend, I'm going to go ahead and dedicate that weekend to me actually sitting down and watching the full WrestleMania show so I can start taking notes on it and leave enough time to watch the following Retro Raw episode the next week instead of trying to condense everything into 2 days, because no. I mean, that ain't fucking happening. So, yeah, that's the game plan. That's what we're going to do. Deal? Sound good? Y'all on board? Good. And break. Let's do SmackDown. And what can you honestly say about SmackDown at this point? Well, based on the way this show went down, it was the Roman Reigns Cody Rhodes show. That I don't think can be disputed. There was Cody and Roman's promo that opened up the program, and then there was everything else that followed. It was the equivalent of trying to come down from a high. No, actually, I think a better analogy would be, it's like arriving at a five-star restaurant and having the waiter serve you a medium rare filet mignon as the appetizer, and then coming back out later with the main course, and it's a basket of dry bread and olive oil. So Roman and the Bloodline came down to open things up, taking about 16 hours to do their regular entrance and get in the ring so Roman can do his acknowledge me shtick. And before Roman can proceed any further with his promo, who should interrupt him but the American Nightmare, Cody Rhodes, appearing on SmackDown for the first time in, I believe Michael Cole said 7 years, which probably doesn't seem all that long, but in wrestling years, I mean, that's damn near an eternity, man. And he gets in the ring and addresses from the onset that he's just here to have a plain old conversation with his WrestleMania opponent, without the Bloodline hanging in the periphery. Unless Roman doesn't feel comfortable. And of course, everybody in the audience goes, ooh. But no. Roman tells Wise Man, Solo, and Jimmy to hit the bricks and let him deal with Cody on his own. He can handle it. So after the Bloodline takes off, Roman tells Cody that he may not be comfortable with what he's about to do, but he's going to do it anyway. And just to twist the knife into Cody's back, the champ makes a mockery of the situation by removing both belts from his shoulder, and he drapes them flat across the ground like placemats, just disposing of them like pieces of trash. And of course, Roman's first classic line of dialogue, he looks at Cody and he goes, "So what do you want to talk about?" Which I think kind of popped Cody. But Cody talks for a couple minutes about how successful Roman's been as Universal Champion. For 915 days, he's dominated every challenger put in front of him. At this stage, people are starting to question the idea of, is it impossible to beat Roman? And for some, it very well may be. The problem, though, is that Cody's made an entire career out of defying odds and breaking barriers and running through obstacles put in front of him. People said he was nothing more than Randy Orton's understudy, obstacle kicked over. People said he would never be able to overcome Stardust, obstacle kicked over. People said his experiment independent pay-per-view he ran with the Beta Bucks and Omega would never get off the ground, obstacle kicked over. He's made a career out of overcoming the impossible. So for him, beating Roman doesn't seem all that impossible. And then came the point where Roman cranked up the heat. He turned that broiler up to the max. Started dishing out burn after burn after burn to poor Cody here. He goes, "Man, that was good, Cody. Bet you were in the back rehearsing that one all week." And the crowd goes, Oh. Then he goes, now let me ask you a question. Have you ever won a world title? Have you ever even competed for one? Have you ever main evented WrestleMania? Because I've done all that, and then some. Roman's talking about how he's been groomed for greatness since he was a little kid. Not just by his own father, but by Cody's father. They used to spend hours talking with each other when Roman was in developmental. All the things that Dusty called well in advance before Roman ever reached the main event level status in WWE. Dusty knew from day one Roman would be the guy. And it took him a hell of a long road to get there, but at least in the current market of WWE, we can definitely say Roman is that guy. But it's ironic, because when Dusty would have those conversations with Roman, you know what he would always say about Cody? Nothing. Not a damn word. And he tells Cody he wishes Dusty were here right now. But if there's something that he didn't teach Cody when he was a young boy, Roman will. And he goes to extend the hand to Cody for a handshake. And you could just see the fire in Cody's eyes, seething with rage at this point. He's trying to fight back emotional outburst. And here's what he basically comes up with to retort to Roman's promo. He realizes that Heyman didn't come to Raw to cut that promo on Cody to play mind games with him. Heyman cut the promo on Cody to speak the real-life truth. And if the truth is that Roman was the son that Dusty always wanted, well, that changes the landscape of everything. Because it's not a desire or a want for Cody to become undisputed Universal Heavyweight Champion. It is a necessity. It is what will define his entire existence. And now the question is, can Cody defy what may be the greatest obstacle ever placed in front of him? Bigger than the intentional sabotage that was the Stardust gimmick. Even bigger than him starting an alternative wrestling promotion to rival the WWF for their treatment of Cody's career. Now that Cody's earned his main event slot at WrestleMania, will he be able to withstand the pressure and overcome the obstacle that is closing in on Roman Reigns' damn near 1,000th day as world champion? You know, I don't know about you, but judging by the way this all went down, I would make the argument that this was some pretty damn good storytelling. Maybe AEW ought to try and replicate something like that. No, but in all seriousness, this is great. Can't put this segment over enough. That was about as good as you can get when it comes to promo delivery in wrestling these days. The art of selling people on the importance of a major championship match. Doesn't get much better than this, man. It really doesn't. And as I noted earlier, from there, it was pretty much a steady decline from Seg 2 to the end. And man, I hate to have to throw poor Rhea Ripley into that category, but when you're saddled with having to wrestle Liv Morgan, there ain't a whole lot of good that can come out of that. I spent the entire time wondering why it was taking Rhea Ripley more than 30 seconds to just steamroll over this chick and beat the shit out of her. I guess because this company's got an unhealthy obsession with pushing puny generic blondes that look more like porn stars than they do professional wrestlers. This match was painfully long and choppy as fuck. Liv's offense is absolutely appalling. She's never been able to execute that suicide tope without catching her feet in the ropes. Someday she's going to try to do that move and she's going to eat shit on the floor and break her neck. Then the company will finally realize, Yeah, maybe we should have told her to stop doing that move after she botched it like the other 83 times she tried it. But they're just going to keep letting her do it, and they're going to regret it. Like I said, went way too long. Liv got in way too much offense. Rhea hit a riptide and then tapped Liv out with the inverted cloverleaf. Literally nothing else to say about it. Then we came back from break with the bloodline in the locker room. You know, Roman's asking Jimmy Uso what the status of Jay is. And yeah, Jimmy's trying to play it up like he needs some time, Uso. But Roman tells Jimmy that he's running out of patience. And when Jimmy goes, I'll let him know, Roman goes, not with Jay. With you. There's a pause. And Jimmy just goes, I'll let him know. The plot thickens with the fall of the bloodline. I also determined watching this that if I had Roman as a father, I'd be shitting peach seeds the moment I walked through that front door as a kid. If I came home from school and the first thing Roman said was, acknowledge me, son. You bet your ass I'd be in the kneeling position acknowledging Papa Roman with a snap of a finger, man. Because what Papa Roman wants, Papa Roman gets. And then Mommy can walk in from the kitchen and skewer me for having failed my math test. Can you imagine that household? Rhea Ripley as Mommy and Roman Reigns as Poppy or Daddy. And I guess that makes Dom the outlaw cousin with the criminal record. Talk about a dysfunctional family. At least I'd be disciplined. What the hell are we talking about? I got so sidetracked. I don't know. Now, speaking of Mommy, her and Dom were walking in the back until Santos Escobar confronted them. Basically challenged Dom to come meet him in the ring to fight him. If he has the cojones ese. So we had the impromptu match. At least I think it was impromptu. I don't really know. I mean, Dom and Rhea were heading to the locker room before Escobar got in their face and issued the challenge. So, as far as I could tell, I don't think this is a scheduled match. But it was official now. It was fine. It's still really weird for me to try and buy Escobar as a babyface. Like, from the time I started watching him in NXT years ago, he's always been a heel on camera. And a pretty good one at that. And then, for pretty much no reason that I could think of, they shoot a random angle weeks ago on SmackDown where Escobar and Rey became friends. And I don't know, the whole thing just seemed out of nowhere to me. Just very odd. Granted, when he's in there with Dom Mysterio, he stands out as a sympathetic babyface. The nuclear heat that kid has is remarkable. The fans hate him so much. It's awesome. The finish to this was pretty good. They did a double collision spot toward the end, and while Dom had the referee in the corner, Rhea pulled Escobar out to the floor and gave him the riptide so she can throw him back in, allowing for Dom to hit the frog splash and get the pin. Probably the only time in WWE where I will accept the idea of a girl beating up a guy and it actually looking believable. Only Rhea could get away with that, though. And afterwards, Dom grabbed Rey's mask that was on the turnbuckle post, and he tore it up in front of Escobar because, I don't know, he's a dick. The announcers tried to play this up as a big deal because this particular mask, I guess, was the one that Rey gifted to Escobar personally. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there like, dude only has 178 different masks laying around his home right now. You could buy most of them on WWE Shop. So, really, who cares what mask Rey gave to Escobar? They're interchangeable. But they did another confrontation angle where Rey came out to try to get the mask back from Dom, but Dom kept goading Rey into punching him. And after Rey refused, Dom threw the mask on the ground. And when Rey went to pick it up, Dom sucker punched him. Poor Ray. Also, now that I think of it, where the fuck did Escobar vanish off to? Did he just sit at ringside watching Ray get clocked in the back of the head? Why didn't he try to run Dom off? Psh. Some friend. Anyway, after that, we had some phone footage of Sammy walking through the arena earlier in the day in a hoodie, hyping up his match with Solo Sikoa for later on, and trying to continue his mission to dismantle the bloodline from within. And, albeit it was borderline impossible to tell half of what he was saying, because the fans were completely drowning him out in the background. But it looked cool visually, seeing all the fans behind Sammy cheering him on. If this were the 80s, the girls would have already torn Sammy's jacket off and security would have been hauling people off in handcuffs. But, well, you know, times change. Then we went back to the ring for a Drew McIntyre promo. At least what started off as a Drew McIntyre promo and then very quickly escalated into one of those never-ending opening Raw monologues from back in like the mid-2010s, where it's just layered entrance after layered entrance after layered entrance of nothing but promos. Now, Michael Cole had already kind of let the cat out of the bag before the commercial that McIntyre wanted Gunther for the Intercontinental Championship. So they come back with McIntyre mentioning that he doesn't have anything planned for WrestleMania right now, but there's one guy that he's had his eyes set on for all of about 3 weeks. So he's calling out Gunther. But McIntyre doesn't get Gunther. Instead, he gets his fellow comrade, Sheamus, or I guess you could say former comrade, by the time all this went down. Because Sheamus is out, and he's pissed. He's asking Drew what the hell he's doing coming out behind his back and issuing challenges. He knows how much the IC title means to Sheamus. For 15 years, he's worked his ass off to get that belt. It's the only belt he's never held in the WWE before. Of course, Drew's trying to let cooler heads prevail. He's telling Sheamus that he doesn't need his permission to issue challenges. He's not Drew's mom or dad. And while Sheamus recognizes that, yeah, that's true, he's not Drew's parents, he recognizes that Drew's nothing more than a backstabbing bastard. And now things get real. Since friends tell the truth, since we're being real, the truth is that Sheamus had his chance against Gunther twice, and he lost twice. And right before it looks like they're about to come to blows, who should swoop in to save the day but everyone's favorite icon of SmackDown, LA Knight? Yeah! Without a doubt, one of the best talkers in the company today, and the fact that he's so damn good on the mic, it's impossible to hate this man, despite the fact that he's supposed to be a heel. So, of course, he gets a big pop when he comes out, and his first words are, "Let me talk to ya," and everybody erupts with excitement. So he's doing his shtick down to the ring, talking about how you can't have a conversation about the IC title without considering LA Knight. Yeah. And he's cutting this promo, and they keep putting the camera on Drew and Sheamus in the ring, who are standing there bantering back and forth. The joke, I guess, is that they're not even acknowledging LA Knight's existence. He's just cutting this promo, and there's Drew and Sheamus just talking to each other, not even knowing that he's there. Someone should have started, "Acknowledge him." That would have been funny. So, at this point, it's like, all right, the segment is okay. I could see or envision where this is ultimately going. And then things got stupid. Because here come the fucking New Day to ruin everything. They're strutting and dancing and shucking and jiving down to the ring, poking fun at LA Knight and talking about how he wants a Mania match, but he can't even win a match on SmackDown to save his life, which is a travesty that they even had to bring that up. And if that wasn't bad enough, then who should come out but Karrion Kross? At this point, I was convinced I was in a time warp. I'm like, am I watching a Raw segment from like 2014 or 2015 where everybody on the fucking roster is just hanging out in Gorilla waiting their turn to come out and talk? My God. So here comes Kross in his discount Kohl's Hawaiian button-up, and he gets into the ring, or he gets to ringside with Scarlett, doesn't even get in the ring. He just walks around ringside and looks at everybody. And that's when dudes start jumping each other and start laying waste. And amidst this whole melee, by the time it was over, I couldn't tell you who was mad at who was being featured or pushed, or what any of this was leading to. No, actually that's a lie, I take it back. This apparently set up a 5-way for next week's show, even though there were 6 guys involved here, but I guess Xavier Woods wasn't part of the conversation or something. I have no idea. Out of the entire cast of these characters, the only one that I wanted to see was LA Knight, and I think the crowd would agree, judging by their reaction when he came out. And the problem is that if they did LA Knight versus Gunther for the IC title at WrestleMania, it would be heel versus heel. Not that that hasn't been done in the entire history of wrestling before, but highly unlikely. It's also a bad case where it would probably split the crowd because people want to like LA Knight, but I don't think the people really want to boo Gunther either. So it's just, I don't know. I don't think it would make it for a particularly good wrestling dynamic. Unfortunately, though, it's probably not going to be Gunther and Knight at WrestleMania because they got Knight hooked up in this New Day nonsense now, and Kofi just beat the guy clean on last week's show. So if there is a payday for LA Knight at WrestleMania, Lord knows it's going to be anything high profile. But yeah, this was kind of a mess. It started off good with the Sheamus and McIntyre face-off and the LA Knight promo, but then it kind of fell off a map and never recovered when half the fucking roster started interrupting for God knows what reason. I just wasn't a fan of this. And then they did Shayna Baszler versus Tegan Nox. That they did. And Ronda Rousey was involved. Just buried in the middle of the show like just another gal on the roster. Glad they're getting a return on the investment with her contract. At least they followed it with a good promo in the back with Gunther. The 2 other Imperium guys were there. Marcel the Shell and Fabio Ichabod, but they kind of just stood in the background and didn't say anything. Gunther talked about how it is a grave miscarriage of justice that Adam Pearce still has not found a suitable number 1 contender to challenge the Ring General for the IC title, and all Gunther wants is a worthy opponent for WrestleMania. What a heel. A bad guy wanting a proper worthy title contender to match his in-ring ability for the grandest prize in the great sport that is professional wrestling. Yeah, for the life of me, I can't imagine why people wouldn't want to cheer this man. What a horrible human being that Gunther is, wanting fair competition. Moving along, though, as Michael Cole put it must be WrestleMania season. Because that's the only time of the year, I guess, where the brand split completely goes out the window and dudes just randomly jump ship from Raw and SmackDown like it's nothing. Even though we see that virtually every month and nobody ever bats an eyelash at it. But apparently when Bobby Lashley makes a surprise appearance on SmackDown, it's an unexpected turn of events. The most shocking shock of all shocking shockers. Ugh. Well, I kind of figured this was going to be all kinds of fucking idiotic and dumb by the time it was over. Sure didn't disappoint. Lashley comes out, he calls out Bray Wyatt, and up on the screen flashes Uncle Howdy and some other weird, ominous images. Uncle Howdy then runs in and attacks Lashley from behind, which Lashley quickly fends off and spikes him with a spine buster. It was at this point that I determined whoever is working the Uncle Howdy gimmick, no way they're any bigger than 5'6" and 180 pounds. Because Lashley was a fucking beast next to this guy. I never really put two and two together just how tiny this Uncle Howdy guy is. So he goes to set up Howdy for a spear, and the lights go out. Uncle Howdy runs off into the void, and when they turn the lights back on, Lashley's there standing alone in the ring. Yep. Get ready for more hocus pocus bullshit. We got 4 weeks to build this bad boy up. It can only get dumber from here. No wonder Brock turned down working with the guy. Hunter probably went up to him one day and said, "Now, Brock, we want you to work Bray at WrestleMania." And Brock just went, "Nah, that doesn't work for me, brother." And good on him. I know Bobby doesn't have as much contractual leeway as Brock does to just outright put the kibosh on potential feuds. But man, oh man. Bobby Lashley versus Bray Wyatt. Poor Bobby. You know, I think I even remember just touching on this really briefly. Like all joking aside here, I'm just visualizing this on paper. Like, if I remove all the Bray Wyatt shenanigans and all that stupid crap for a minute, if I just look at this match on paper and try to imagine what this would look like in execution, does this even look that appealing? Lashley versus Wyatt? Ugh. They're really going there, huh? I mean, nothing could be worse than that Mountain Dew pitch black match, right? Right? Someone please say right. Maybe I'll just move on before I give myself a heart attack. We had another bloodline angle in the back before the main event. Jimmy's back to deal out the news to Roman on Jay's status. And the answer from Jay, he wants Roman to leave him the hell alone. And suffice it to say, not the answer Daddy was looking for. So Roman is now giving Jay an ultimatum. First off, he wants Jimmy to go out with Solo tonight and rid everybody of this Sami Zayn problem, because these issues didn't start happening with Jay until Sami got involved. So he wants Jimmy to go out there and get rid of Sami. And as for Jay, he's got 1 week to give Roman an answer. And if Jay doesn't respond accordingly, Roman is not going to blame Jay. He's going to blame Jimmy. So now shit's getting real. Definitely added a lot of story intrigue to the main event. It's Solo Sikoa versus Sami Zayn. Jimmy Uso at ringside with Solo to, well, apparently not immediately attack Sami from the opening bell and beat the shit out of him, as directly ordered from Roman. No, instead, Jimmy came out with Solo. He stood on the outside and waited until later in the match to get involved. Maybe, maybe I'm just nitpicking. Didn't matter anyway, because Sammy took the fight immediately to Sikoa and Jimmy, ended up hitting a big senton dive out to the floor to take both guys out. So it evened the playing field, at least momentarily. The flurry of offense lasted a few minutes before Jimmy ran a distraction so Solo could take advantage. That allowed for Solo to work over Sammy for the heat. Sammy milked a little comeback at the end, hit a couple big offensive moves. And then we get this finish, which I actually had to go back and rewatch just to make sure that I actually saw this correctly and my mind wasn't playing tricks on me. The finish is Sammy setting up to give Solo a haluva kick in the corner. Jimmy pulls Solo out of the way. Solo then gives Sammy the Oriental spike to the throat. And then Solo pins Sami Zayn. And, again, I had to watch this a second time through just to make sure that this was for real. I was dumbfounded? Is that an accurate enough term? They just have Solo Sikoa straight up beat Sammy flat like that? 1, 2, 3, middle of the ring. I mean, okay. Don't really know if I agree with that. Kind of seems like they ought to be protecting Sammy right about now. Especially if he's still being factored in for some kind of big featured match in Mania. But with the way they booked this finish, I don't know, man. It was questionable at the very least. I mean, they kind of gave Sammy the jobber treatment here. And especially when you factor in the post-match stuff, too. Because they do the deal where Jimmy tries to wrap the chair around Sammy's neck and sets him up in the corner so Sikoa can kill him with the running hip attack. But Jimmy gets in the line of fire and tells Sikoa that he wants to finish the job. But Jimmy waits too long to make the charge. So Sammy gets up, throws the chair at Sikoa's head, and then hits Jimmy with the haluva kick anyway. You know, and right as Sammy teases he's going to whack Jimmy over the back with a chair, Solo runs Sammy off through the crowd. You know, they show the split camera shots where Jimmy's looking all despondent and Roman looks like he's about 3 seconds away from punting some newborn puppies. So he's mad. And, I mean, whatever goes down with the bloodline next week, I imagine it's not going to end too well for Jimmy Uso. And, like, I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with the angle they shot. I liked everything about the segment. Except that fucking finish, man. God, that was so stupid. I mean, technically, if you really want to sit here and debate it, you could argue they sort of gave Sammy an outing because Jimmy got temporarily involved and helped pull Solo out of the way. You know, but even when Solo hit the spike on Sammy and pinned him, like when the ref counted 3, the crowd was like, huh? It was just lame. Maybe I'm in the minority with that opinion, but I mean, if they absolutely had to beat Sammy here, they needed to do something more protective. Like, even a DQ finish would have been more preferable. You know, again, I'm still operating under the impression that Sammy's being factored in for a match with the Usos in Mania. Probably with him and Owens going after the tag straps. You know, so when I see Sammy taking falls like this on television so close to the pay-per-view, kind of rubs me the wrong way. Like, it's giving me the indication that maybe Sammy's not all that important in the grand scheme of what they're building creatively. And that would kind of be sad considering how much of a factor Sammy's been in this entire bloodline story. So I would not have booked that finish. Other than that, I like where this is all going. They're always leading you to the next week's show with great cliffhangers. And, not only are we waiting to see what Jay's status is going to be, now Jimmy's going to be in hot water. After he failed to do what Roman asked of him on this show, he failed to take out Sammy. So, whatever happens to him next week, it ain't going to end well. So there's excitement there. They're always leaving you with anticipation to see what happens next. It's good stuff. Like I said, the show kind of petered out after the Cody-Roman confrontation. The stuff with Jimmy and Roman throughout the show was good, but, nothing was going to top that opening promo. That was about as authentic and genuine as you can get when trying to hype up a world title match for a pay-per-view, man. Both guys I thought were outstanding there. They're laying in a lot of detail with that storyline. But again, it all goes back to what I was referring to when I covered that Cody Heyman promo on Raw. They're sort of blurring the lines a little bit between kayfabe and reality by bringing up Dusty, mentioning how integral he was with Roman's career. And, while Roman was being condescending and trying to get under Cody's skin like a heel would, there's a lot of material in there that definitely came off like he was having a real, genuine conversation with the guy. There was some warped reality sprinkled in there, but none of it came off phony or scripted. And, the one thing I always complain about in wrestling today is that you don't really get a lot of stories where you actually buy the two guys hate each other. And, while I don't think Roman and Cody are at that level yet, there's still some time. They could really do a good job selling people on the idea that these guys can't stand one another. And if they stick the course with it and keep that feud white hot, they could have themselves a real barn burner by the time we get to that actual title match. The environment for that thing could be pretty electric. Maybe not as hot as the crowd was for the Roman Sammy match at the Chamber show, but pretty damn close. And again, like I said, the rest of the show was kind of there, which is sort of the sad reality of where we are in the current scheme of WWE booking. It's the Bloodline versus the world, essentially. And the Bloodline's walking away with win after win after win virtually every week on this show. There's nothing remotely close to reaching the pinnacle. That's the Bloodline story. And even though there are still a few things under the surface that are intriguing on paper, the real selling point for that Mania card is everything involving Roman and Cody, man. Oh, we've arrived at the main event. AEW Revolution. It occurred. It's in the book. And as I said at the top of the program, I have a lot to say about it. And it really is kind of a mixed bag. There was a lot of good on this show, a lot of bad. And even after the pay-per-view is over and I'm sitting here on a Monday morning trying to collect my thoughts on what I thought about the show overall, I really don't know what I think of it. Part of it's probably because of the main event being so great that I was in a moderately good mood by the time the show was over, even though I was dog tired. And again, because I really haven't taken the time to do an overall opinion of the show, may as well just run down the card and talk about what went down. And hopefully by the end we can sort of gather our thoughts and come up with a consensus on whether or not this pay-per-view is actually good or not. Tell you the truth, I still don't think I'm going to be able to figure it out by the time we're done here. Now, we opened it with quite the visual experience. The rematch that no one ever wanted to see because, well, let's be frank, there was never any reason to do a second match in the first place. Jericho and Starks had their match back in January. Starks won clean as a sheet. We all wanted Ricky to immediately move on to something else because we know what happens when guys get sucked into the vortex of Chris Jericho's creative mind in this company. No one ever comes out better for having worked with him. He ends up needlessly dragging out programs for like 8 months longer than they have any right to go, and they all suck. Forgot to mention that. Now, here's what I'm going to say about this. If I remove pretty much all of my opinions on Chris Jericho, and I try to just review this match in a vacuum, again, discounting the horrible buildup and how it's done nothing for Ricky except get him less over with each passing week, this was easily the second best thing on the entire show. For one, and you'll very quickly figure this out once we get to some of the other cow manure that we were fed on this card, it was one of the only actual wrestling matches on the entire show. It was two guys having a moderately competitive, hard-hitting professional wrestling match. No one was doing inverted corkscrew planchas and 1,400 super kicks. No one was jamming barbed wire into the other guy's asshole. There was no bad comedy at play. Jericho and Starks went in there. They had a very basic, no-strings-attached wrestling match. And hey, imagine that. It ended up being very good. It wasn't great. I'm not going to sit here and say it's winning match of the year in anybody's book, but certainly on this show, it stood out as being one of the better matches. You know, Ricky went in there with the taped ribs. Actually, I think more accurately, he went in there with a piece of tape wrapped around his ribs. Jericho kind of utilized that injury and worked that over throughout the match. Man, I'll tell you too, despite everything I've ever said about how this feud has done nothing but weigh Ricky down the longer it's gone, these people still love the guy. I remember the first time I saw Ricky was back when he was still doing those old NWA studio shows back in what year was it, 2019? And God, what a total disaster that product's been since then. To think at one point they had Ricky fucking Starks on that show. Now they got Gags the Gimp. Thanks for that one, Billy Corgan. In any case, I remember when Ricky was a heel, and I always thought to myself, God, this guy's got such a smug attitude. The facials, the way he conducts himself in the ring, he's such a great douchebag on camera. In a million years, I don't think I ever would have thought to myself that I would actually prefer seeing a babyface Ricky Starks over heel Ricky Starks, because he's just as good a babyface, if not better. And again, man, neither guy did anything flashy here, but the people were still into it. Honestly, I think my favorite spot in the whole match was the running spot where Ricky went to try and hit Jericho with a spear, but Jericho countered it into a code breaker. Like, that looks sweet. For my money, I guess if I wanted to nitpick one thing in the match, the only thing I would have maybe suggested is laying off all the near falls, especially for an opening match on a pay-per-view card. Like, I mean, you could build the false finishes and near falls later on when you have the main event level matches you're building to. Like, I don't know, doing too many near falls in a match that curtain jerks the pay-per-view, it can get a little excessive. So I would have cut back on some of those. The finish was interesting, I guess. I know they kind of did it to swerve the fans into thinking Ricky was going to get fucked over at the last minute, and by that token, it worked. If the goal was to swerve the crowd, what happens is Ricky has Jericho in a single leg Boston Crab, and while he has the hold applied, outruns Sammy Guevara, which, by the way, I forgot to mention here, completely at random, there was an added stipulation that all members of the Jagoff Asshole Society were banned from ringside. So why Sammy was then permitted to just run out at the end without Aubrey Edwards immediately calling for the bell, I have no idea. Doesn't matter, though, because as soon as Sammy got down to ringside, he immediately got cut off by Action Audrey, got taken down with a tackle. At first glance, it looked like a fan hitting the ringside area. Like, that is how generic and unmemorable Action Audrey has been in AEW. Just another one of those great ideas from the mind of Jericho. And while Aubrey is distracted with those two on the floor, Jericho uses the baseball bat on Ricky's ribs. He then tries to set him up for the Judas effect, but Ricky blocks it, gives Jericho a knee strike to the jaw, and then kills him with the Rochambeau for the win. The crowd obviously popped for the finish. Well, again, the run and angle tease was not particularly necessary, but at least it didn't involve the entire faction like I was kind of afraid it was going to. Like, I thought they were going to overbook this thing all to hell. Just run-ins galore, a million different things going on. Thankfully, they didn't do that. And Starks won clean. Again. All right. It's exactly what should have happened. I reserve the right to change my mind at a later date if this win turns out to mean absolutely nothing in the end. If this is actually the culmination of the rivalry and Ricky moves on to something else and gets the fuck out of Jericho purgatory, then I'm good with this. I have no qualms. But if Ricky comes out on Dynamite next week and gets blindsided by Jericho's goons and they drag this crap on for another 6 months, then this finish can go piss up a rope. Because it will have meant nothing in the end. But at least I could say by this point in the show, I was relatively satisfied. Granted, it was one match, and I didn't watch the pre-show stuff because, no. But after one match on the show, good. No complaints so far. For AEW, I consider that a win. And then came the rest of the card, right up until the main event. So remember when we were previewing the Revolution card on the Friday show? And I briefly covered my thoughts on this interminable Jungle Boy Christian Cage feud that's still going on after like 6 goddamn years. Well, in doing so, I guess I left out the obvious that this was not just a singles match between Jungle Boy and Christian Cage for the pay-per-view. I neglected to mention that it was a coffin match. The fuck? When, where, how, why? Yeah, you know what? Never mind. I give up. AEW booking. What can you do? Yeah, let's just throw that random stipulation in there for no discernible reason. 4 days before the pay-per-view, and someone woke up one day and said, let's make it a coffin match. Okay, Russo. So, God. I mean, where do I even start? I know I say that virtually every time I'm about to review something baffling or stupid, but like, no, really, I don't even know how to go about breaking this down. This featured our first of multiple crowd brawling sequences throughout the pay-per-view. Took them less than 5 minutes to get that going. Because AEW can't ever get enough of those. How many potential lawsuits do they need to tease before it finally happens? Going back to the stipulation thing for a minute, though. You know, I saw both guys come out in street clothes. At the very most, I would have figured if they were going to add some kind of stipulation to this, it was like, okay, the street fight thing, it's not really my flavor, but at least in this context of the way this program's been built up, I could have bought it. But, like, I don't know. Is it just too hard to have two guys have a fucking wrestling match in this company? Why does everything need to be a hat on a hat? Why does every match need a million stipulations and car wreck brawling to get over? Is the idea that Tony thinks that the fans won't enjoy Jungle Boy and Christian in a regular standard match? Like he's afraid it's not going to get over? I mean, I guess I can understand if Jungle Boy was in there working with another green guy that doesn't have a lot of experience, but he's working with Christian fucking Cage. There was so much Christian could have taught Jungle Boy if they would have just gone out there and done a normal match. How the hell is Jungle Boy supposed to learn anything working with Christian when the entire stipulation calls for nothing but chaos and no rules? He needs to learn timing. He needs to learn pacing. He needs to learn how to slow things down. He needs to learn ring psychology and how to develop drama throughout the match. How to build up the big key spots. How to make things seem impactful. Can't learn any of that shit when guys are just throwing crap at each other and hitting shit with each other left and right. Windmilling back and forth with a bunch of fake punches. I don't know. Maybe I'm just bitter and old. Wouldn't be the first time I came to that conclusion. I also like how the gimmick with all of Jungle Boy's matches now is that his mom and sister are always just randomly sitting in the front row watching, looking dazed and confused. Probably as a shoot, too. They're probably like, what the hell is going on here? Why is there a coffin at the top of the ramp? And I'll tell you what, aside from the ringside brawling and Christian trying to constantly bail away like a coward, there wasn't a whole lot to the match. I wasn't even sure how the fuck either guy was supposed to win the thing until the last several minutes when they finally brawled up to the burial ground at the top of the stage. And by the time both guys started fighting in the dirt mound, meanwhile there's this puny-ass casket just hanging out there the entire time. By the time Christian opened up the lid and pulled out the chairs, like, I just started laughing. Excalibur's sitting there like, that devious Christian Cage, he must have planted those chairs there. Or, you know, they did this to try and be cute, and all it did was come off as hokey and fake. So again, they're fighting at the top of the stage now for seemingly what feels like an eternity. I can only imagine what the people on the bottom floor at the polar opposite end of the arena were thinking at this point. They were probably having a ball. Man, this is really riveting watching this pay-per-view from the overhead monitor. Glad I bought a ticket to see it live. And they're up there trading spots back and forth. They're trying to throw one another inside the casket, jockeying for position. And the finish is Jungle Jack putting Cage in the snare trap, jamming the shovel inside of his mouth. Christian then proceeded to pass out in the span of about 4 seconds, just totally knocked out cold, despite being in this hold in less time than it takes for me to let out a wet fart. At which point, after they already established that Christian was dead from the submission hold, Jungle Boy then proceeded to kill Christian with the concerto, and then he drags Christian over to the casket, takes about 7 years to read him his last rites, and then he finally slams the lid shut. And in very cartoonish fashion, the coffin then immediately drops through the trapdoor gimmick, and Jungle Boy then proceeded to fake cry. And I laughed. This was stupid. Total waste of Christian Cage. I mean, if there's any redeeming quality about it, I kind of go back to what I touched on earlier with the Jericho-Starks match. Hopefully with Jungle Boy going over, it means they're done with this perpetual, never-ending feud. I've been over this thing for a long time. I guess the coffin gimmick was very fitting in the sense that hopefully it means they're burying this feud deep beneath the earth and never speaking of it again. Put a cap on this thing and move on. Please. And then came time for the play kids. Recess dismissal came early, I guess. For the trios titles, it's the Beta Bucks and Kenny Omega versus the House of Drek. Figuring going into this, I had two choices. I could either leave the room and not watch and skip to the next match, which I'll talk about in just a bit, or, since I still had a little bit of my sanity preserved by the time we got here, I could watch the match and then be proven right yet again on everything I have ever said about an elite match. It went pretty much exactly as I anticipated. If you watch my preview, you kind of knew what my expectancies were. They did about 14,000 video game moves in a row, kicked out of every finish in the book, no-sold the shit out of everything, no semblance of tags at all. Of course, that was to be expected, especially when that idiot Rick Knox is the assigned official for the match. And that guy lets everybody get away with first-degree manslaughter in their matches. Just stands there with floppy dick in hand, never enforcing tag rules of any kind. I mean, I know I'm a broken record at this point, but this is exactly why I normally just skip over these matches. Doesn't matter if I'm watching it on TV or pay-per-view. It's the same thing every fucking time. The elite are going to have their style of match. The people that enjoy that kind of play wrestling will eat it up and like the taste of it. And the rest of us regular wrestling fans out there see it for what it is. A mockery of the business. A concerted effort from three immature juvenile pricks to try and present this as the norm of professional wrestling. Except on a bigger stage. Instead of keeping it on PWG and the Outlaw bars where it's always been suited for. It was everything I knew it would be. I did note early on the sloppy arm drags Omega was giving to Malachi Black in the early goings. Those look ghetto as fuck. Yeah, sounds about right. Figures that the guy that knows how to do every aerial trick in the book, after how many years in this sport, still can't do a basic fucking arm drag to save his life. But he's still an all-time great, according to Meltzer. I think I counted somewhere in the ballpark of like 84 thigh slaps from both teams, most of which looked more egregious than others. I also like the deal with Julia Hart at the end where she just stood on the apron while Malachi and Omega were trading spots. Also, Omega could inadvertently hit her with the V-trigger. That was the one spot where I blatantly watched Omega slap his thigh in plain view of the hard cam. Didn't even try to hide it. They did a deal with the finish where the House of Drek threw the Bucks into the front row after they had already been hit with a suicide dive and multiple kicks from the HOB. I think the Bucks were down for like all of 15 seconds before they hopped the guardrail and sprinted back into the ring to break up another near fall. I'm like, do these fuckers know how to sell anything? Like, the answer is no. I don't even know why I bother asking. And after the Bucks went for their Meltzer driver on Malachi, Buddy Matthews hit Nicky Buck with a knee strike when he was going for the 450. More accurately, Buddy slapped his thigh, and Nicky sold it like he was dead. Malachi then hit Matty Buck with a spin kick so Brody could then kill him with one of those Rikishi driver deals for the 3 count. Oh yeah, I guess I should mention the obvious too. New champions. Yay. So, what? Does that mean the Elite are just going to trade wins back and forth with the House of Drek on television for the belts now? Is this going to be another best of 7? Because I'll tell you, man, if you're really trying to look for more excuses for me to fast forward through this bullshit on television, by all means, book another best of 7 series for the Trios title. I dare you. Better yet, just make it a best of 28. That ought to keep all the Elite cucks happy for a while. I mean, I don't have much of an opinion on the title change one way or the other than why. Granted, the belts are fucking useless to begin with. They always have been. No one gives a shit about those things. Discount the small subset of mouth-breathing serpents that are part of that elite cult. You know, us normal, everyday wrestling fans see those belts for what they've always been. It's Kenny Omega and the Bucks as play toys so they can share and pass around to all their playmates and stay secluded in their own little camp. But like, I don't know. Even half-heartedly joking aside, what the fuck is the trios division in AEW anyway? Have they ever taken the time to establish who the actual established six-man teams are? Take out the elite from the equation. You got the House of Black, and I'll even use their Christian name for sake of reference. You've got Death Triangle. Is that it? I'm talking like actual legit established trio teams. Not makeshift teams or randomly paired guys that work together on TV for like 2 seconds and then split off and do their own thing again. I'm talking legit bona fide established 3-person teams in AEW. Those are the only 3 I can think of. And for the elite, you've already exhausted both those programs. I don't need to see a Death Triangle elite match for as long as I live. I really have no desire to see them extend the elite House of Black feud. Where do you go from here? Like, the whole thing's just a complete and utter disaster. You know, at least when the Bucks were in the regular tag division, people actually kind of viewed that division seriously. What has the trios division done for anybody? I'm being serious about this. I'm not even trying to be a jackass. I'm trying to be authentic when I ask this question. What has this division done for anybody involved? Aside from keeping the elite from having to do business with the real stars. You know, at some point, we're going to have to look at this objectively for what it is. I've asked the question, what is the trios division? And aside from what I just said a minute ago, that it's nothing more than a vanity project so the EVPs don't actually have to do proper business with anybody that's not in their little camp. But how long are we going to sit here before we start calling into question the real dilemma in this entire situation? I'm trying to think. When did Kenny Omega return to TV? It was the early fall of last year, right? When was the All Out pay-per-view? Because I know that's when the whole thing went down with the EVPs and Punk. And they all got suspended for a period of time. I mean, I know it's been a while, but the point is, Omega's been back on TV for a long time. It's been at least 5 or 6 months now, right? Has he added any value to the TV product since he came back? Has he worked one single solitary regular singles match on TV? Look, say what you want about the guy. I'm not a Kenny Omega fan by any stretch of the imagination. I don't have a burning, seething hatred for the guy like certain other people do. Not to name names outright. But, I mean, we can't sit here and deny that Kenny Omega was the world champion for this company at one point. And again, while I was never the biggest fan of his title run and I didn't like all the stuff with him and Don Callis, at least when Omega was in the singles division as the world champion, he came off like a bigger star on television. Since he's returned, he's been an absolute afterthought. And again, this is not generic 128th guy on the roster we're talking about here. This is Kenny Omega. This is one of the EVPs of the company. Again, regardless of what I think about the guy, he is supposed to be one of AEW's top stars, right? How much does he mean to the current product? At this point. Same goes for the Bucks. I can't stand those guys. You all know that. Omega at least has a few redeeming qualities as a singles wrestler. The Bucks don't even have that. They just flat out suck. But even so, how much do the Bucks mean to the current product right now? Since they kickstarted the whole trios division, the answer is not a whole lot. It may mean something to a small portion of the overall audience that enjoys that style of wrestling. But even those people, I think, would have to acknowledge that nobody in that group means as much now compared to a year or two ago. You're telling me right now that Kenny Omega and the Beta Bucks mean more to the company in 2023 than they did in, say, 2020 or 2021, when they were actually featured on top as main event stars? I think you're joking yourself if you're saying that. The novelty on this whole trios division wore off before it ever got off the ground. I mean, sorry to speak the cold hard truth here, but you can only have this same style of match before people get bored with it eventually. And the question I think a lot of people are going to have to eventually ask themselves, is it wasting potential opportunities for the Bucks and Omega to actually draw money with other names? The FTR Bucks rubber match was something we all wanted to see. They blew their chance with that one because Maddie and Nikki got their panties in a bunch that they would have to do another job to FTR. Because that meant they would have to accept the fact that they were the inferior tag team. And Lord knows they were having any of that. There's still things they could do with Kenny Omega as an upper mid-card single star that they're not going to get by wasting him in meaningless spot fest bullshittery. I mean, I don't know how good the matches would end up being, but given AEW's current main event picture right now, you don't have Punk right now. Ricky Starks is a maybe scenario. Adam Cole's still lurking in the background, I guess. But beyond that, who are your top babyfaces right now? You really don't have many options. All signs probably point to Adam Page being next in line for the title shot, but even that feud doesn't exactly leave me with a lot of intrigue. But you could always potentially throw Kenny Omega in there as a possible challenger to MJF. Again, I don't know if the dynamics would make for a great feud. The promo exchanges would be very interesting, but I'll at least openly admit that Omega working a singles program with MJF over the world title, it's more enticing than watching him jack off with all his buddies in these meaningless six-mans. You want to prove that the EVPs have any value or worth to this company? Then you need to start proving it. Otherwise, all Tony is doing is feeding into their fragile little ego trip they're on right now, where they only want to work with their friends and not bother contributing to any part of AEW's growth. And if it turns out that all the Elite want to do from now until the end of their contracts is ride this wave of meaningless six-man tags every week, then maybe Tony ought to call into question their contract renegotiations. Maybe he needs to slap them with a provocation. If he's going to pay them big money contracts, they need to be doing some big money business. And that means working with actual stars, doing business the right way, being professional. I know it's a bit much to ask of these pricks, but something's going to have to change. Because I think people are kidding themselves right now if they think this trio stuff is improving the quality of AEW's product from a financial or viewership standpoint. Based on the ratings, the viewership question has already kind of been debunked. But I'm just going to leave it at that and move on with the show. So after that calamity, I knew I was going to have to cleanse myself of the stain eventually. Luckily, up next was the three-way girls match. So that was a good piss breaker spot for me on the show. Lord knows I needed it. For the record, if you care, it's Jamie Hayter, Ruby Soho, and Saraya for the title. The program where nobody has been able to tell who's on what side, who's mad at who, or why any of it matters. Again, if you watch my preview, I was pretty blunt about where I stood with this. I figured I wasn't going to watch it, and I didn't. I periodically came back in the room while it was going on, and stuff was happening. More crowd brawling at one point. There were some sloppy-looking three-way spots that I caught. Again, I had no idea who was babyface or heel for most of it, so when I saw the girls teaming up at various points, I just kind of figured everybody was playing for the same team. Saraya is not very good in the ring, and I've been saying that for years. People always used to claim that she was like one of the best female wrestlers in WWE history. I never understood what the fuck people were talking about. I always thought she sucked. You know, at this point, I think it's a matter of Tony trying to justify her contract by even booking her in this thing. Because, objectively speaking, looking at it for what it is, she's done absolutely nothing to enhance the quality of the women's division. She had that one pay-per-view match with Britt late last year that was mid at best. Kind of exposed the reality that Saraya just wasn't a good wrestler, if anything. Jamie Hayter retained, as I kind of expected she would. I don't know how she won. There was a weird-looking roll-up exchange with her and Ruby at the end, and I looked away for a few seconds, and then all of a sudden I just hear, "Ring the bell!" I was like, so what the fuck happened? Did she pin her? Did she submit her? Who knows? From that point, I did see all the post-match angle stuff where Tony Storm ran in and jumped Britt and Hayter. Also, Ruby could then officially turn and side with Tony and Saraya, which made absolutely no fucking sense. So you're telling me the game plan was, let's have Ruby swerve everybody by joining with the heels, but as a result, she's also going to spend approximately 10 minutes kicking one of the heels' asses in a match. Because that makes sense. Sounds like another one of those Russo deals where they just do the heel swerve for the sake of doing it. Not because there was any logic put into it, but because it would get a reaction. Whatever. Again, I didn't pay much attention to this, so my opinion is sort of invalid anyway. But, you know, I kind of presume that whether or not Ruby Riott is a face or a heel doesn't really help matters any when you really break down the actual problems that currently undergo the women's division in this company. Luckily for me, though, got to come back just in time to see the start of this Texas death match with Hangman Adam Page and the AutoZone attendant. A Texas death match in California, by the way. But, well, to be fair, I think we've already established, based on AEW doing that Mid-Atlantic, All-Atlantic tournament months back, geography doesn't seem to be Tony Khan's strong suit. So yeah, that sucked. Not that I expected anything less of a Jon Moxley match. And I hate to have to regurgitate talking points from earlier, but again, I'll go back to what I said in my preview from the Friday show. What were the expectations here? I was expecting tons of car wreck bullshit. I was expecting Mox to bleed like a stuffed pig. I was expecting nonstop ECW hardcore garbage from start to finish. Didn't disappoint. It met those expectations and then some. Oh, and the crowd brawling. Can't forget about the crowd brawling, too. Because we already didn't see enough of that after the previous 3 other matches on the card. They used all the projected plunder they could find. Barbed wire, folding chairs, bricks, chains, barbed wire boards, forks. You know, the usual shit you find stored underneath a wrestling ring. Because you never know when you're going to need a pair of bricks at a pro wrestling show. Always need to have those hanging around. Or a fork. Obviously, both guys bladed. I mean, Moxley, that one goes without saying. That dude wakes up every day and gigs himself before he brushes his teeth. He's a goddamn moron. At least Moxley's bladed enough to know how to properly cut himself, though. Adam Page's blade job looked like a paper cut. Of course, they hit each other with all kinds of shit, all the artificially contrived gimmicks they could find. There was a folding chair wrapped in barbed wire at one point. They were taking bumps on that. They were falling through the gimmicked barbed wire boards. There was one bump that Page took onto the floor, onto one of those things. Came damn near close to falling straight on top of his head. Barely even grazed the thing. A couple more inches and that guy would have landed on top of his head, and that would have been the end of his career. Of course, things got more absurd toward the end where Mox was just beating the guy into powder. At one point, he gave Page a curb stomp onto the bricks, which not only led to the people chanting Seth Rollins' theme song, which was just fucking grand, but Page also managed to beat the 10 count. Because I forgot to mention that this was also last man standing, even though that is not traditionally what a Texas death match is, or ever was when it was created back in the 60s. But I also wouldn't expect these people to know that. There are spots where Mox is dropping Page with pile drivers on chains. Page just got back up, perfectly fine. And finally, after they did all their lame GCW-inspired horse shit, the finish was Page dumping Mox over the top rope with the chain wrapped around his throat. And Moxley tapped out. What do you want me to say? It was a Jon Moxley porn match. He gets off on mutilating his body and bloodying up his face for the entire world to see. It's the same fucking shit we always see with the guy. I knew it was going to be garbage. All he had to do was mention the magic words, Texas Death. Instantly, I knew what I was getting. But honestly, this conversation goes back to what I was talking about with the trios match. There's a very small audience that enjoys these kinds of hardcore bloodbaths. And for those people, yeah, of course they were going to like it. They got to see guys do a bunch of risky jackass stunts through furniture for almost 30 minutes. What's not to like about that? It's easy enough for me to sit here and say, it wasn't for me. But that's kind of me playing the cop-out neutral position. I don't know. I don't get it. I never got it. I will never understand for the life of me why there are people out there that genuinely enjoy this kind of match. The kind of thing where guys are hitting each other over the head with shit and tearing their bodies up to shreds like that. I don't find it remotely entertaining or enjoyable. And in the case of Mox, I mean, his shit looks so bad 99% of the time anyway. When I watch him in there wrapping barbed wire around his body and acting like a deranged psychopath on camera, just comes off so phony to me. Like everything about him, from his ring work to his rotten promo ability, it screams indie to me. You know, we always talk about the idea of guys needing filters. Whether people want to accept this or not, Moxley is one of those guys that greatly benefited from the WWE machine. Because when you remove the handcuffs and let that guy loose to go out there and come up with his own shit, this is what you get. A 30-minute self-mutilation. And it's not good. We can pretend it is, but you're lying to yourself if you think so. My hope is that when Moxley losing here, that means he'll go away for a while. Crossing my fingers. Take that long vacation that he was apparently planning on almost a half a year ago. He needs to go away. I need to rid myself of the stench that's been Jon Moxley's run for the better part of the last year and a half. Because I'm fed up with this guy. I'm fed up with the promos. I'm fed up with the matches. How anybody could vote that guy Wrestler of the Year in any fucking sane universe? How Tell you what, he didn't get my vote. Don't blame me. You can all give that one up to the Wrestling Observer Award voters. Because they obviously have a weird, unhealthy fetish for this hardcore stuff too. It's the only way I can rationalize how anybody would consider this fucking idiot Wrestler of the Year. Beyond ridiculous. But at the same time, I'm also somebody that always talks about how I don't have anything in common with most wrestling fans today anyway. Hence why I usually don't bring it up in regular, normal conversation. Because if I do happen to stumble across anybody that's a wrestling fan anymore, chances are most of them are going to be advocates of this kind of nonsensical garbage wrestling. So it's probably better I just keep my mouth shut and not say anything at all. You know, except when I come on here and talk about how trashy this kind of wrestling is. Then we had Samoa Joe and Wardlow for the TV title. Or TBS title, not the TV title. Actually, hold on. Is it the TBS title? Fuck, now I don't even remember. God damn it. There's too many interchangeable belts in this stupid company. It's impossible to keep track of who has what. I think it's the TBS title. Let me just type this in real quick. I had the tab open for this pay-per-view. Oh, no. It's the TNT title, not the TBS title. Jade Cargill's the TBS champion. Yeah, Joe is the TNT champion. I knew it was one of the mid-card belts that represented the network station. Who cares? No, seriously, does anybody honestly give a shit who the TNT champion is at this point? Like, this whole match was just a sad case of a no-win situation for either party. I like Joe. I like Wardlow. In an ideal world, this feud could have worked if Tony Khan had any clue of how to capitalize when a guy is white hot. And he's totally butchered Wardlow's push. That guy means absolutely nothing anymore. Joe was beaten into powder long before they ever even put the TNT title on him. Even so, like, remember the deal like a month ago where they randomly flip-flopped the belt on Darby for no reason? Right when they were in the middle of the Joe Wardlow feud? Simply put, I didn't care about this. The match wasn't horrible or anything. I just didn't care. They tried to make it work with doing the big Haas fight. The crowd was cold for a lot of it. You know, they already kind of threw this match under the bus by hyping Powerhouse Hobbs' title match for next week's Dynamite. Yeah, maybe the other problem too was that I was just kind of fatigued by the time we got to this point in the show. Because, I mean, this pay-per-view was already way too goddamn long to begin with. By the time we got here, I think I was just kind of ready to see the main event. Plus, we still had the 4-way tag title match. Like I said, it was harmless, but I've seen better matches from Joe, and Wardlow's cooled off so much in the last year, they've managed to get me to not care about him. I mean, if anything, I definitely got the prediction wrong. So you can all throw that one back in my face if you so desire. Judging by the angle they shot on Dynamite, I did not think they were going to do a title switch. I also probably would have advised they didn't do the title switch, since Joe versus Hobbs would have probably been a much better match than Wardlow versus Hobbs is going to be. To me, I don't know, I think Wardlow winning the belt here probably should have had a bigger impact than it did. But again, this goes back to what I've been saying about the TNT title. You know, they passed that belt around to so many guys in the last 2 years. It honestly has the same appeal to me at this point that the hardcore title did in the WWF once upon a time. It's an underneath belt that gets passed around way too frequently, at least ever since the stuff they were doing with Cody when he was the champion a couple years ago. The belt surely doesn't feel major league. They also got way too many belts to begin with, so that doesn't help matters any. I don't know, man. Like, how many title switches are we at this year? Is this the third title change we've had since January? Joe was the champion before he dropped it to Darby. Then Joe won it back from Darby about a month later. And now here we are on pay-per-view and Joe's beating Wardlow. Or I'm sorry, Wardlow's beating Joe. It's just too many back and forth title switches. It's impossible to care. The belt is meaningless. Them switching it back to Wardlow to me doesn't really make a whole lot of sense unless they decide to keep the belt on him for a while and maybe build him up to be one of MJF's challengers for the world title later on. I could visualize them doing like a winner-take-all scenario. At one point, I would not have been opposed to that. Back when Wardlow was really hot and the MJF-Wardlow feud actually had momentum behind it. Now, gotta be honest, I'm really not that intrigued. I guess there's always that possibility they can catch lightning in a bottle a second time, but with Tony's track record, I'm not too optimistic. But we'll see. I'm not against the title change. Right now, I just don't really see what good it's going to do. And then came the four-way match for the tag titles. The AEW tag titles, by the way. It's sad that I even have to mention that, but, I mean, there are only 38 different sets of tag belts in this company at the current moment. It's the Acclaimed, Lethal and Jarrett, Danhausen and the company mascot, and the Ass Boys. Yep. This is AEW's current tag division, pretty much. At least with what we're led to believe are the top teams. 2 mid-card teams at best. A team with 2 relatively decent talents, but have been played up for laughs most of the time. And a complete joke comedy duo with 2 of the most insufferable pieces of human debris on the entire roster. That is what we're left with. And, well, remember when I was saying how much better this probably would have been if they would have just done a normal tag rematch with the Guns and the Acclaimed? Starting to think I was right in that assertion. This was, well, I guess you would say it was the comedy portion of this clown show extravaganza. We had a normal wrestling match in the opener, the bad gimmick match involving a coffin, the trampoline jack-off session, the girls' match, followed by the hardcore bloodbath. So, naturally, I guess it was only a matter of time before they needed to include their tongue-in-cheek session of the pay-per-view. Because you got to have a little bit of flavor for everybody, I guess. At least that's what's currently being marketed in this company. The sports-based wrestling presentation product. Keep that in mind. So, yeah. It was a comedy match. I knew it would be. I mean, you throw Orange Cassidy and Danhausen into the equation. That's why they were there. But, at the same time, when you throw Sanjay Dutt and the Kali bootleg in there too, who, gotta be honest, are kind of starting to come off as equally as bad as Danhausen and Cassidy are at this point, all it did was make the whole match that much worse off. Between that and the fact that it was a 4-way, that didn't help either. They did all the usual bad comedy spots where Cassidy's dropping dudes overhead with his hands in his pockets. Grown-ass men flipping and bumping for this fucking clown with no physique or muscle tone. Looked absurd. At least I can credit Cassidy for looking like he goes out of his way to hit the tanning bed once in a blue moon. Danhausen looks like a fucking tub of droopy mayonnaise with his outlaw-looking body. The whole thing is just a bunch of constant 4-way spots with everybody getting in each other's way. Of course, Aubrey's just standing there waving her hands the whole time, not doing anything to stop any of it. Sanjay's getting involved way too much, just totally detracting from everything. That also led to more bad comedy when Satnam got involved and did the face-off with Danhausen. Actually, it was great because when he originally came in, all Satnam Singh had to do was literally grab the Ass Boys by the throat, dragged them over to the ropes so Colton and Austin could take their own bump out to the floor. Satnam still managed to fuck the spot up because he did not give them enough momentum when he tried to push them over the ropes. And they're still paying this guy money. They also did a spot where Billy Gunn gave Satnam the Famouser, but then got immediately laid out by his sons. There was also a false finish where Jarrett brought in a guitar to use on Caster, but Caster got possession of it. And while Aubrey was distracted trying to get the guitar out of the ring, Lethal came in and hit Caster with another gimmick. That also got a 2 count. I did like the brief shoving altercation with Aubrey and Jeff. That was probably the closest thing that you will ever have to male-on-female violence in AEW, but at least it looked believable. There was more chaotic stuff that happened at the end. I'll just skip to the finish. Danhausen tried to sneak in to steal the belts on the Guns, but they got a near fall out of that. And then a few seconds later, Danhausen missed a running kick, and the Guns hit the Shatter Machine on him for the pin. It was a total mess. One bad comedy spot after another. I noted here, this was the first title defense for Austin and Colton. And here they are getting shoehorned in the middle of this godforsaken cesspool with all the comedy acts and the indie dreck. And you know, I almost kind of feel bad for having to include Lethal and Jarrett in that equation, but I've kind of been over those two as a tag team for a while. You factor in they're going to be associated with Sanjay and the Giant, you pretty much know anything they're involved with is going to be terrible by and large. The Acclaimed, God. I don't even know what to make of those guys anymore. Just goes right back to the same conversation of Tony missing the boat on guys and never having any idea of how to capitalize on momentum. When guys get over, he does the polar opposite of what should be done. They were just another set of bodies. I don't know. Again, man, this is what we're relegated to. This is AEW's current tag division. And I know that wasn't all to the segment. I'm building to it. Give me a minute. But I just want you to think about that. Remember when everybody was boasting about how stacked and loaded AEW's tag division was years ago? And you had all this promise that the tag division was going to be one of the featured draws in this company? Look at what they're left with. This is what they're left with. These are the teams that were good enough to even qualify for the match. What does that say about everybody else? However, there was a sliver of hope to come out of this. Because while the Guns are celebrating in the ring, who should come down to interview them but Renee Paquette? And directly out of the Tony Schiavone playbook, she asks one question to Colton and Austin, something generic, like, how are you guys feeling right now? And bam, whose music should hit but FTR? Easily to one of the most electric pops on the entire show. No question. Well-deserved too. And they come storming down to the ring. They confront the champs. They get right in their face and immediately start throwing down. Great-looking punches. Looked realer than anything I had seen up to this point in the show. More believable than the fake punches I was seeing with Moxley and Page. And they lead the champs laying. They gave Colton the double-stuffed pile driver from the middle rope. They kill Austin with the Shatter Machine. Both guys sold great for it. And by pure association, the visual of Dax and Cash showing up again on camera completely changes the dynamic of the division. The people went crazy for the return. FTR looked great. I have no clue how Dax busted open his eye, but looked cool visually. Gave him a gnarly looking presentation. And by association, I'm now intrigued to see FTR back in the tag scene again. While I really can't account for the way Tony was booking them prior to their disappearance, I can look past all of it if this is going to be a fresh coat of paint for them. If they go in there and steamroll over the Guns and win the belts back, fuck yeah. I'll take it. I don't know who the hell they feud with afterwards. I mean, with the Elite dropping the six-man titles on this show, maybe they're going to revisit that rubber match idea with the Beta Bucks. As long as FTR go over, I don't have a problem with it. But like I said, man, even them just appearing on camera again, getting that reaction, it instantly changes the playing field. Cash and Dax are on such an elite level above everybody else. No pun intended there. But they're so well and above every other team in this company. It's not even close. And when you see them go out there and get that reaction, it shows. They are main event level stars. You would never know it by the way Tony Khan's ever booked them. But the people react to him like they're big deals. And I'm interested to see what Tony does with them. I hate to boil the conversation down to whether or not he fucks them up again. Maybe he'll make the right call, though. If Maddie and Nikki aren't professional enough to do the job for the belts, you know at least Austin and Colton are going to be. So we'll see what happens. In the meantime, I got one thing left to talk about. My voice is completely shot at this point. This show did a number on me. But we have the main event. The 60-minute Iron Man match for the AEW World Championship. MJF defending against Bryan Danielson. They've been building this up on TV for a while. The build's been moderately good, I would say. Is it my favorite MJF feud in AEW? No, I wouldn't say so. Yeah, I think they could have probably done a more efficient job in rallying up the hatred between these two guys. It's not to say it's been all over the map, but between the whole William Regal thing, the Gauntlet series of challengers, the back and forth promo exchanges on television, I don't know. It's been up and down. It hasn't been consistent. Yeah, and I will concede. A lot of people have kind of been critical that it's followed the same formula a lot of MJF's feuds have, especially when you throw in the whole running through the series of handpicked challengers to even get the opportunity to wrestle him. Admittedly, yeah, we've seen that story with MJF. It's kind of old news at this point. Generally, I would say the feud's been missing that extra something to really make it stand out as a blood feud. But given the scenario, I was still looking forward to the match. The Iron Man stipulation felt a little out of left field, and by the time this all concluded, they really didn't leave a whole lot of room for growth, say they ever decide they want to revisit this feud down the road. I mean, we'll get to more of that in detail once we get to the finish. But they did the whole pomp and circumstance entrance for MJF. The thing with the small string chamber playing MJF's theme song with the devil masks on, it was a little on the nose for me. Kind of screamed WWE presentation. And, with AEW purporting to be the anti-WWE, that didn't really sit well with me. Generally, I just am not a big fan of that stuff anyway. It doesn't matter what company does it. It's just not what I'm looking for when I watch a wrestling product. But holy shit, man. When MJF came out to the ring and took off that robe, damn, is that guy in good shape. Phenomenal shape. He just looks like a big star. He comes off like a big deal. You look at Max with that AEW world title around his waist and you're like, love him or hate him, you can't deny that guy screams main event level dude. The whole inadvertent slip up at the beginning where MJF was trying to take off the belt, but he accidentally dropped it, and the people all started heckling and giving him shit for it. It was one of those unexpected things, but he played it off so well. The announcers are talking about how it's the nerves kicking in now that MJF realizes he has to go an hour Broadway with one of the best wrestlers in the world. And it starts off exactly as you'd anticipate. They ring the bell. MJF hesitantly tries to match wrestling ability with Danielson. Doesn't go over well for him. Danielson's outmaneuvering and outsmarting him. So Max bails out to the floor and stalls for time. And Danielson's in there doing jumping jacks and trying to play it off like it's another day at the office. They did some great back and forth chain stuff at the beginning. Headlock, tackle, drop down, hip toss. Just great fluid wrestling. Both guys jockeying for position. When MJF goes to put his hand out, Danielson runs him off through the crowd so MJF can dump a cup of water on a poor kid sitting in the front row. That was awesome. And again, a match like this is all about pacing. So even when MJF is doing the subtle things like stalling on the floor or flipping off the fans, it's all strategically done so that he can keep his distance from Danielson, so they can build up to bigger spots down the road. And even so, MJF found ways to cut off Danielson and work over the bad shoulder, and they'd been building that one up on television for a while. At the same time, MJF had been selling the knee, which was something Danielson worked over very early on in the match when he had him wrapped up in all those leg submissions. They ended up building to the first big series of falls that kind of took place in rapid-fire succession. They did some back and forth pin trading on the mat, and finally Danielson was able to catch MJF with a Busaiku knee for the first fall. And because they were going directly into the next series of falls without doing any breaks, when Danielson tried to set up MJF for another running knee, MJF did the fake out where he dropped down. So when MJF went to pick him up, MJF cock blocked him for the DQ. But with Danielson temporarily stunned, MJF ended up getting 2 quick falls off that immediately to tie everything up again. And I'll admit, I kind of went back and forth on it for a while. I wasn't the biggest fan of it at first, mostly because I'm so used to seeing Iron Man matches get those temporary break spots after a fall's been completed, just giving guys a chance to recoup and get back on their feet. So when they announced here that there were going to be no break periods and MJF got those 2 quick falls like that, I was like, really? I don't know if I like that. Thankfully they didn't just have MJF rack up another 8 rapid-fire pins in a row. He got the 2 quick falls to even it up again, and then Danielson kicked out of the 3rd attempt. And they slowed things down for a while. Danielson was going back to cranking on MJF's leg. They did a figure 4 spot at one point where MJF kept screaming at Danielson and kept slapping him in the face. Danielson just kind of took it and no-sold it. That was pretty great. They ended up building to a deal on the floor where MJF was able to hit Danielson with a great flying elbow through the timekeeper's table. Looked absolutely flawless. Tried to get a count-out win off of that, but Danielson was able to break that up. And they ended up getting to the 3rd fall, where after MJF drove Danielson through another part of the outside table with a tombstone, he then hit Danielson with the heat seeker for another fall. At this point, Danielson was busted open, and both guys are really selling the fatigue at this point. And after MJF spent a while working Danielson over and continuing to target the shoulder, they end up doing the spot where Danielson threw MJF off the top rope with a superplex throw. He ended up giving MJF the diving headbutt, and MJF came up gigging, profusely bleeding from the head. Good Lord. That was a pretty deep cut. He did a better blade job than the fucking oil mechanic did in that garbage death match. And bleeding is kind of Moxley's specialty. As they were closing in on the 10-minute mark, Danielson locked in the regal stretch on MJF for the tap out. And, again, that evened the playing field at 3 falls apiece. Another case where I went back and forth on the idea of, would I be having MJF tap out under any circumstance right now as the world champion? Especially this early into his title run. Albeit, I wasn't a big fan of watching him submit in the middle of a match. especially if it was just going to be part of a regular fall and it wasn't even going to be the conclusion of it. But it's probably just me being nitpicky. It's honestly probably more reason to call into question the decision of booking this to be an Iron Man match. And of course, by this point, both guys are exhausted and bloody. It literally looked like two guys had been through a war zone. Blood splatters all over the ring mat. If I hadn't already seen a million guys bleed prior to this point, I'd have been sitting here talking about how this was the perfect match on the card to do the bloodbath deal. They ended up building to the big standoff at the last 5 minutes or so. MJF ended up giving Danielson a great middle rope tombstone, but couldn't capitalize on the pin because of the bad knee. And with about a minute left to go, Danielson traps MJF in a single leg hold. MJF is clawing and scratching and fighting with every fiber of his being to get to those ropes. The people are all over this fucking guy. Tap, tap, tap. And as the time finally expires, people are all showering the scene with booze. They got the medical team in there attending to both guys. Doc Samson brought out the oxygen tank. At which point I thought, yeah, I wonder when that gimmick's going to factor into the match. And while both guys are laid out, Tony Schiavone begins reacting on his headpiece, wherein he goes down to ringside to tell Bryce Remsburg and Justin Roberts that Tony Khan has ordered this match to continue until there is a decisive winner, which was kind of weird. Like, why was Tony Schiavone the one that got clued in that the match was going to continue? Shouldn't Bryce have also gotten word through his earpiece? I don't know. Pass the buck, I guess. But of course, everybody's jolly that the match is going to continue, except for MJF, who looks like he's about to shit his pants. At which point, the desperation ploys begin kicking in for Max. He's trying to cock-block Danielson, do anything in his power to get DQ'd. He goes to use the belt, but Bryce isn't having any of that. He tells Max, if he wants to use the belt, by all means be his guest. But if he does, he is going to disqualify MJF and award the belt to Danielson. So at that point, they actually built to an awesome near fall where Danielson hit MJF with a Busaiku knee. Everybody thought Danielson had the win right there, but no. MJF actually kicked out. People were very caught off guard by that. And granted, I wasn't a fan of the Poison Rana setup beforehand. I still hate that move. I think it needs to be banished back to the indie circuit where it belongs. I also love the angle where MJF tried to pull out the diamond ring before Bryce got involved. So when Danielson had Max in the sharpshooter at the end, Bryce goes over to casually remove the ring from MJF's finger while he's screaming in pain in this hold. And they get to the finish where MJF gets the ropes, while at the same time begins tapping out. And of course, Danielson had his back turned, so he hears the tap, so he thinks he's won. But Bryce is talking to him, and Max crawls out to the floor to grab the oxygen tank gimmick, so he can then hit Danielson over the head with it while he's hiding underneath the ring skirt. At which point, MJF gets in the ring, he locks in the crossface on Danielson. Danielson's trying to fight out of it, but he eventually loses it, and he ends up tapping. Which I think was something people were shocked at more than MJF winning the title with the crossface like that. They actually had Danielson tap out instead of pass out. Which again, you can argue whether or not that was excessive. I mean, MJF hit the guy with a fucking oxygen tank. Like, if this were real, wouldn't Danielson have been knocked out cold? Just saying. And, I mean, if you look past the fact that it was a 60-minute Iron Man match that still wound up going over 60 minutes by the end, it still kept my attention. And I was absolutely drained by the time we got to this point in the show. I honestly didn't think I was going to be able to make it through this thing without falling asleep. And there were periods in there where I was drifting off a little bit, but from the 10-minute countdown up until all the post-match stuff and the entire sudden death period, I was glued. They had me here. This is a really great match. A long match, but it still held up. I knew it was going to be good. I didn't think it was going to be this good. I've heard some people argue this is the greatest Iron Man match of all time. Setting the bar of low expectations, I guess. I mean, I wouldn't go that far. It's certainly one of the better Iron Man matches I've seen in the modern era, but best of all time? No, come on now. Seriously. I mean, we're still arguing whether or not the Iron Man match was even needed for this thing to begin with. So, let's just try to be objective in some way. Again, I like both of these guys, but at some point you've got to be impartial. Remove the blinders, people. Just try to analyze it for what it is. But it really begs the question now. Okay, so MJF won. They threw everything and the kitchen sink at this match. So it obviously leaves you with the lingering question of what's next? And it is a good question. I'm kind of interested to see what happens now. You know, did they possibly blow this off to the point where if they ever decide to revisit the Danielson MJF feud down the road, it's not going to mean as much? Possibly. You know, again, they had Danielson tap out, and he was the babyface. So, kind of seemed like the blow off to me. And again, let's even make the argument, okay, they decide to do this match down the road again. Where do you go from here? It's an honest question. They really didn't leave a lot of room for growth. There was really no margin for error by the time this was over. And maybe that's a good thing? It's hard to say. Again, this hasn't been MJF's best feud. I don't necessarily think it clicked like a lot of people thought it would intentionally or initially. So it's fair to say that maybe this was done so they can move both guys on to something else. And granted, MJF doesn't have a lot of probable babyface challengers now. Ricky Starks going over Jericho, that could probably set up those guys for the title rematch because people really liked that feud at one point. But again, they're going to be milking this title reign for all it's worth. So MJF is going to need a lot of challengers between now and whenever they decide to take the belt off of him. Maybe sometime mid to late next year. So, I mean, they got to start building some guys up. There were a couple names that I rattled off a while ago. But, yeah, good stuff. Hats off to both these guys. I really enjoyed it. Again, it was a very long match, and it was kind of getting to the point by the time they got to the sudden death part, I just kind of wanted to go to bed. But the effort was there. And God, the people were into it. They were hot for this thing, man. That's hard to come by these days. You know, people get so exhausted when these pay-per-views run for 4 or 5 hours. It's hard to keep that attention level from start to finish. There's a burnout factor that eventually comes into play, but man, with the way that people were reacting to this thing, you'd have thought that was the curtain jerker for the pay-per-view. So then it leads to, well, what are your general thoughts about the show? Honestly, man, it's one of those deals where sometimes when you watch a pay-per-view, if the main event is fitting, it can honestly make up for any of the bad stuff that you see previously. Granted, I'm not going to sit here and go out of my way to say that, oh, this pay-per-view was disaster from start to finish or anything like that. there were two things that I liked on it. The match that opened the show and the main event. Everything in the middle was just not for me. The stipulation match with Jungle Boy and Christian I thought was kind of a detractor more than anything. The trios match was exactly what I knew it would be. The girls match was my piss break. The Texas Death match, exactly what I thought it would be. And it's not my flavor. Wardlow and Joe, it was there, but I wouldn't say it was remotely exciting. In the four-way tag match, again, I go back to what I talked about in the preview. I would have rather seen just a regular Guns Acclaimed rematch. You know, even if, let's say you wanted to make it a three-way and you throw Lethal and Jarrett in there, I mean, I still wouldn't have advocated for it, but would have been better than needlessly throwing in the fucking company mascot and that other dumbass act. I mean, because then it just turned into exactly what I figured it would be. A comedy match. And again, there's a very small subset of the AEW audience that loves the comedy wrestling. Good for them. But if you're trying to present a wrestling product that is real, what you allegedly purport to be a sports-based wrestling product, I mean, I looked at this show from top to bottom, and yeah, there was a mishmash of everything, but doesn't mean that all of it was good. So, I don't know. Was it their worst effort? No, not really. I still think they need to cut back on these shows by like at least an hour, but it is what it is. You know, my enthusiasm level for the pay-per-view going in wasn't particularly high to begin with. It kind of met my expectations. The main event saved the show. And it's kind of my overall opinion on it. So there you have it. We will see what they build to next. Apparently Tony Khan has some more groundbreaking announcements to dish out in the next few days. I am foaming at the mouth. But we're going to wrap this up because I got to go through the editing process here, and it's going to take me a long time to do so. So thank you all for tuning in. You know, as always, if you watch the pay-per-view, you can feel free to chime in and share your thoughts down below. We'll be back on Friday for the standard Friday episode. We got the Retro Series continuation and the fallout from the Revolution pay-per-view with whatever Dynamite has in store and whatever they're building up to for the summer. It's a lot of open-ended discussion, but we will see what they do. Thanks for tuning in. Take care. Peace out.